Good evening and welcome. My name is Kurt Witcher, and I'm the manager of the Genealogy Center of the Allen County Public Library here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It is terrific to have all of you joining us this evening. We have a really excellent program. I am positive of it to look forward to this evening. I hope you are all joining us for Unraveling Your Ancestry, a conversation on genealogy and DNA. And actually, the conversation will be between our our DNA expert, Sara Allen, and the questions that you offer through the Q&A button in Zoom. Again, welcome on behalf of my colleagues here in the Genealogy Center, and certainly welcome on behalf of our presenter this evening. Sara Allen has been involved in genealogy for many, many years. And I apologize if some of you have heard this before, but seriously, she was doing DNA before DNA was cool. She and her mother did some wonderful DNA projects. She has a lot of experience, and people have appropriately commented on the fact that she explains things well, methodologically, no thrills, no spills, no chills, just the facts. And it's a really awesome way to get to know this wonderful tool, this DNA test results that we have at our disposal now in 21st century genealogy. That combined with all the other resources we have available to us can be very, very powerful. So I want to welcome my colleague, Sara, and I'm going to disappear from your video cameras, but I will be in the background. So thanks so much, Sara.
Yep. All righty. Thank you, Kurt. Welcome, everybody. Some of you may have come to some of our question and answer sessions before about DNA. And normally I would start right in to the question and answers at this point. But tonight I thought I would mix things up, do things a little differently. And I thought I would preemptively go into my Ancestry DNA account and show you the ethnicity estimate, because it never fails that we get a lot of questions about ethnicity. And I want to kind of like get some information out there about the ethnicity estimate right off the bat here. So I'm going to share my screen and see what we can do here. Okay. So now you should be seeing my Ancestry account. And I'm going to go up to DNA and I'm going to hit on DNA story. And that's where you find your ethnicity. And then I'm going to actually go over and pick my aunt's story because hers is more interesting than mine. Okay. So this ethnicity estimate, people are very, very intrigued by it. And you can get the ethnicity estimate from doing the autosomal DNA test. And that's the most popular test that a lot of people have done. And you can get it from 4 major companies, and then there's some minor companies that also offer it. The major companies are Ancestry DNA, which I'm showing you right now, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and Family Tree DNA has an autosomal test called the Family Finder test. And if you were to order an autosomal DNA test from each of those companies, you would get an ethnicity estimate from each of those companies. And let me tell you, they will vary from one another. Your results are not going to be exactly the same. And of course, people have questions about why that would be. Well, that is simply because they're different companies. So each company is testing your DNA, obviously. And if you're, swiping your cheek or spitting in the tube for each of the 4 companies, then there's no question about your DNA getting mixed up with somebody else's or anything like that. But they are different companies. So they have different ways of doing things. They have slightly different ways of analyzing it. They're basically all doing the same thing, but they might have a slightly different process, a slightly different analysis tool, and they're not going to tell us what those tools are necessarily because they're competitors with one another. The 4 companies are competing with one another. So they have what they call proprietary information that is known only to the company about how they're exactly doing everything. Now, having said that, they do release a lot of information about their ethnicity estimates. And so if you go on any of the company that you have tested with and click on the help, you will find a lot of information about how they calculated your ethnicity and how many people from each ethnicity background are in their database. I mean, generally speaking, they're not going to give you exact numbers, but how they came up with the labels that they use. So these over here, so here's the ethnicity estimate. This is for my aunt. This over here is her ethnicity estimate. She starts with Eastern Europe and Russia. She goes down the list to Wales. And these are basically labels that they're using. So each company is going to have a slightly different label for what they're going to call Eastern Europe, for instance, and where they're going to put England, for instance. Some companies list England by themselves. Ancestry is choosing to lump England in with Northwestern Europe, which includes France and the Netherlands and part of Germany. So it's not clear cut. And then also Ancestry will divide out Scotland and Wales, whereas some other companies will combine Ireland, Scotland, and Wales into one group. So when you have that going on, you can do a lot of comparing and contrasting between the companies if you just test at several of the companies and then just look at how they're calculating your DNA, your ethnicity, and how they're displaying it for you and the results. And of course, the main thing that I always like to tell people, and Ancestry has thoughtfully put it right here, it's an estimate. So you really are kind of going in the wrong direction if you are focusing on trying to look at your tree and then say, oh, well, my ethnicity estimate must be coming from this area on my tree. I don't think it's really meant to be used that way. It's meant to give you an overview of your ethnicity. It's meant to be an estimate, which means it's not exact, it's not precise. And you can't always force it to match what your tree says. And I know we'll get questions about this, and we might already have them in the question and answer, but when should you be concerned that it doesn't match your tree? And the number one rule is that if you thought yourself to be, for instance, all one continent, let's say your family is from Asia and you've always been told that everybody in your family is Asian, that's, one continent. You were thought that you were 100% Asian, right? But you get back your results and it gives you a different continent. It gives you African. It gives you European. It gives you North American or South American. Those are completely different continents than Asia, right? So that is a case where you would have to say, something is going on here. So that is like the general guidance that a lot of the DNA experts will give. But when you have little differences between somebody who's maybe 100% African, their background, maybe their family, just immigrated to this country from Africa recently, and they were living in Ghana before they immigrated to the US, and maybe their their ethnicity estimate breaks down to several different places in Africa. I wouldn't necessarily get exercised about that. I would think that probably those African groups were related to one another, maybe farther back in time. And there has been a lot of movement in all the continents. People have not stayed in one place for thousands and thousands of years. We've had to move because of famine or war or employment opportunities or economic reasons. And so people move, and people have moved in Africa as well. So that would be not something to maybe get concerned about as much. And as far as Europeans go, and this is just kind of a general guidance, Northern Europeans and Western Europeans. So people from, let's see if I can get over here onto the map of Europe a little more. People from Scandinavia, people from Germany, France, Netherlands, right in here, and British Isles. Their DNA has become very, very mixed. And a lot of us are from those areas of Europe, those of us who are European in background. A lot of us are from those areas of Europe, and our DNA is very mixed. And it's not easy because these people have been moving around a lot, and they have been, for lack of a better word, spreading their seed around to the various places. And basically it makes the DNA company's job very hard to try to differentiate between somebody whose background is Norway and somebody's background is Germany, somebody's background is Ireland, because basically we all have very similar DNA. That's why I tell you not to get exercised about differences between those different areas of Europe, Northern Europe and Western Europe. Now, Eastern Europe is different. So if you have an Eastern Europe background, then it should register on this test. And you can see that I have some Eastern Europe on mine, and it is registering. It is different from Western Europe DNA enough that I think most of the DNA companies can detect it. Same thing with Southern Europe. If you are from Spain, Portugal, Italy, Albania, Greece, down in this area, your DNA will be different enough from the Northern European people that it should register and it should show up. I had somebody the other day who was quibbling about Irish versus Scottish again. And the other thing you need to keep in mind is that there are related people groups out there, and the Irish and the Scottish are very closely linked to one another. They're both Celtic peoples, and they're on basically the same, there's been a lot of back and forth, and they're basically, you know, under the same UK. They've been under the UK system for a while, and people have been moving here and there and over here and back and forth, and they're very closely linked, genetically speaking, as well as culturally. And this person was saying, well, my wife's family is Scottish, but when she took the test, she showed up as Irish. And I said, this is probably not a problem. As long as your wife is matching up with the proper people. Like, is she matching up to her cousins on her Scottish side on her DNA match list? If she is, then they're just registering as Irish for some reason, and it's because, you know, the two groups are very closely linked, and that's just the way it is. So that's not the kind of thing to get exercised about. Now, the other thing that would be a bit of something to be concerned about. Remember, I said these are things to be concerned about your ethnicity. So see how this is my aunt's DNA, like I said, and she is Eastern European, or she's a half Eastern European and half Western European. And the Eastern European, she has a community here. So it says Eastern European and Russian, 38%. And then it says your community with a connection to this ethnicity region is Slovenia and Northwest Croatia. Well, that makes sense because that is exactly where our Eastern European ancestors lived. But let's say that it said Poland instead. That's in Eastern Europe, yes, but that's nowhere where our family is known to have lived. And so if it were coming up with some community under one of these countries here, and that's mostly an Ancestry thing. Ancestry is the one that's big into the communities. These communities are very accurate from what I've heard. If you're assigned to a community, it's because you have a lot of DNA matches that also are from that community, and it's part of their algorithm behind the scenes that Ancestry does that spits out what your communities are, that, you know, they're pretty certain when they assign you a community that this is really a community that is part of your background. So like I said, if you are assigned a community on your DNA ethnicity results from Ancestry, and you look at it and you say, I don't think any of my people were ever there in that place, it just isn't possible. Like then that would be another reason to kind of scratch your head and say, maybe something's going on in my family tree that I don't know about. So if my aunt had gotten a Polish community here, I would have had to say, maybe my grandma, you know, my grandma's parents were not Slovenian, maybe they were Polish, or, you know, there's some kind of disconnect going on between the family story that we've been told and what's showing up in the DNA. So that is when you should get concerned about your ethnicity results. But otherwise, and as I said, basically, if you're from Scandinavia, Germany, France, this area over here, the UK, you could get any kind of mixture of these three areas, the Germanic, the Scandinavian, and the UK DNA, and it would be probably accurate because they just can't tell. They can't really differentiate between those countries. They might tell you that they can, but they continue to struggle with this. I mean, they've been doing ethnicity estimates. The four companies basically have been doing these ethnicity estimates now for, I don't know, 10 years at least. And it's just, they keep assigning me to different ethnicity groups here. And you know, my aunt's 5% Sweden and Denmark here. We don't have any Sweden and Denmark. We don't have any Wales, but you know, they're close by to where we were. We were in England, and we were probably in Germany, and we were up in Scotland. And so these places are close by, and they're definitely related groups. They're related ethnic groups. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the question and answers, and I'm going to see what you've got to say about ethnicity estimates. Okay, let's see. Okay, nobody has a question about their ethnicity estimates. Well, I'm very happy that I have explained it to you and nobody has any questions about it. All right. The other thing I was going to show you while I'm screen sharing is that occasionally I will refer to this, and I wanted to just show you this. Someone who's adopted and is looking at their DNA results for the first time and does not know what to make of it all because they're adopted and they don't have any family information whatsoever, you might be advised to do the leads method with your results. So this is a method of sorting through your DNA matches, sorting them into hopefully into 4 grandparent groups. And it doesn't matter if you don't know who your grandparents were. It's just a method of sorting DNA matches out by using the shared matches tool at every DNA company. And so this is the leads method where you can go to find out about the leads method. So it's danaleads.com is her website. And then over on the left, on the right here, it says the leads method at the right top. And if I click on that, She's got a number of blog postings about doing the Leeds method. So this is for somebody specifically who's adopted or who has an unknown parent, like perhaps their father, or an unknown grandparent. And you want to get a handle on the DNA matches from that unknown side of your family. The Leeds method is often a good way to do that. And this is for sorting your autosomal DNA matches into meaningful groups that you can then work with. And like I said, the Leeds method is on Dana Leeds' website here, and she kind of explains it and goes through it. You can really study the website until you understand it. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to go into the Q&A. Okay, so let's just go ahead and go through some of these questions. Like I said, it didn't look like any of them were really about ethnicity. So, okay, this is Kimberly. If a person is an outlier and shares less than the traditional percentage for their full sibling, but shows that the daughter or son to the same parents, will that person generally also be an outlier to their other matches? Well, I'm assuming when you say outlier that you share less than what would be considered normal with your full siblings. I don't know how much less. I think that's just, this is not an area of my expertise, but I will say, I think that's just between you and the sibling. And it may not be the same between you and a cousin, or you and an aunt or uncle, or you and a more distant relative, if that's your question. But I don't really have a lot of experience with that. I haven't studied that in great detail. You might go over to DNA Painter and the Shared Centimorgan Project and see if anybody over there has written anything about that. Or if Leah Larkin has written about that. She's a DNA expert. I'm going to put her name in the chat. She has a blog. I'm not sure what it's called, but if you Googled Leah Larkin, I think you would find it. Oops, I didn't send it to the right place. Let me try that again. So yeah, I don't know exactly the answer to your question, Kimberly, but I don't think it affects the other relationships. Okay, John asked, do you have an opinion for the best resource for DNA certification? I have not researched those different options out there, John, so I don't really have an opinion. I would just research them all, see who is teaching them, and if you are familiar with the names and the qualifications of the teachers of those certification programs, I would say that they're probably going to be an excellent program. It also depends on what you want to do with your DNA certification. Like, are you planning to get a job, and in what field? There's like forensic genetic genealogy, which would be more with helping the police solve mysteries with DNA, like crimes with DNA, that type of thing. Or there's different things that you could go into. So you'd want to make sure that whatever certification program you're going into is definitely focusing towards that end goal that you have. And I'd be happy to talk with you about this with you more if you wanted to email us. And I'm going to put in the chat our email address. And you can address that to me if you would like. Okay. Debbie says she's curious about her maternal line, and she's already done an Ancestry test and a MyHeritage test. Well, Debbie, I'm not sure. And then you ask if you should be doing a different test. Well, I wonder if you're thinking about the mitochondrial DNA test, which is a female line test. That will show you more about your ancient maternal line. Like it will give you an estimate of, it will give you information about like the maternal tribe that your maternal line came from 20,000 years ago or something like that. It'll give you that. The mitochondrial DNA test will also give you matches. I have never gotten anywhere with my mitochondrial DNA matches. They're kind of few and far between. And I think the matching was probably 10 or 15 or even 20 generations ago that we might have matched. And I don't have my tree traced back that far. And so I can't really get very far with it. Most people can find out about their maternal line through doing the autosomal test. So I'm not sure, what exactly your goal is, what kinds of things you're trying to find out about your maternal line. And maybe you are trying to find out about the ancient origins of your maternal line. And if so, then the mitochondrial DNA test might be the one for you. That is offered by Family Tree DNA Testing Company. And it may be on sale right now because Mother's Day is coming up, and I believe most of the DNA companies are running sales. Okay, Alicia says that she shares 52 centimorgans with a DNA cousin. Ancestry says that he is both sides. The shared matches confirm paternal and maternal. Any suggestions on how to handle this? Okay, so yes, Ancestry has recently, so Ancestry's autosomal DNA has recently started trying to label your matches. Side one, I think it's parent one and parent two. And so those are pretty accurate when you're up in the closer match range. So, they should be able to tell that if a first cousin is from parent one or parent two. But I think when they get down into the lower level matches, like 25 centimorgans, and I know you said this is 50 centimorgans, but certainly when they get down to 25 centimorgans, they either can't tell, and so they put down unassigned, or they might assign it to the wrong side. So a lot of people have been complaining and basically saying that they're not sure that Ancestry has labeled their matches to the correct side. And often it is those lower level matches. And so I wouldn't necessarily worry about it, other than the fact that you said you have checked the shared matches and it's matching both sides of your family. If this is kind of an aberration, I mean, I'm not sure if you know whether your parents could be related to one another in maybe a distant way. And certainly what I have understood is that this division into parent one and parent two is not as easy, and it will not be as accurate when your parents are related to each other. And Ancestry might not even be able to do it. So people whose parents might be related to each other would be somebody from an endogamous situation, an endogamous population. Like if your parents, both of your parents are Ashkenazi Jewish, or both of your parents are Amish or Mennonite background, then probably your parents are related to each other. And so Ancestry is not going to be able to separate out your matches. And then people, of course, have parents who are distantly related, like maybe your parents are fifth or sixth cousins to one another. And you already knew that. And that's not a big deal, but it's gonna screw up your shared matching because it's gonna show matches to be both sides when because of your parents' distant relation to one another. Without knowing more about it, Alicia, I mean, you could certainly send us an email and I could try to look at it a little more, but I really don't know, what to say. If that's like the only match that this is happening with, I would say maybe that person is related to you on both sides. Maybe if you look at their tree closely enough, maybe you can find a connection to both your father and your mother's side. That's what I would guess is going on, but I don't know that for sure. Okay, Earl says, I use DNA Painter tool. We can add a percentile of shared DNA in addition to the reported centimorgans. Is that reliable for the reported percent or centimorgans of all the DNA testing companies? You know, Earl, I have not looked into that very closely. I would imagine that Roberta Estes has probably written about this, and Roberta Estes' blog is called DNA Explained. And she usually posts very regularly, like almost daily. And she's up on all of the latest things that are going on in the DNA world. And I bet you she has a blog post about it. And I bet you she tells you what she thinks about it. And I would appreciate her advice. I mean, I would definitely, she's very well informed about these kinds of things. So I would check there and see what she says about it. Okay, Alicia says, how much DNA should I share with a fourth great grandparent? Okay, I'm going to have to count this up in my head. And maybe this will help all of you. The easy way to do this is you start with your parents and you have 50% of each parent's DNA. This is the autosomal DNA that we're talking about now. So you have 12, you take that number in half, you have 12.5% from each grandparent, and that's going to be a little squishier. It's not going to be exact. It could be a little more, a little less. 12.25, I think. No, 12.5 from the great grandparents, 6.25 from the second great grandparents, 3.25 from the third. So it's going to be 1.6%, something like that, from the fourth great grandparent. And that's going to be, you know, a rough estimate. You could have quite a bit less than that, and you could have quite a bit more than that. I think it's by that point it's getting a little uneven in the generations, but that's roughly around the percentage is 1.65 or something like that % of that fourth great grandparent's DNA. So it definitely is measurable, and it should show up in your autosomal. You should get matches to that fourth great grandparent's side of the family, generally speaking, if they're from a tested population. Okay. Barbara says, my third great grandfather was born in New York in 1810. We have no idea his parents or siblings were. Yes. I'm not sure, you don't mention DNA in your question, but I think autosomal DNA could really be a boon for you, Barbara. And I don't know whether you've done an autosomal DNA already or not. The other thing to do is, if this is on your father's side and your father's living, or maybe you have a brother who's living, the son of your father, you could possibly get a Y-DNA test done. And that is if that third great grandfather is in the direct paternal line of your father, which I don't know if it is. The Y-DNA test is looking only at only men can take that test, and it's looking at that man's direct paternal line. So he got his Y-DNA from his father, who got it from his father, who got it from his father. And so if you had a father or brother, if this is the right line, if you had a father or brother that wanted to take the Y chromosome test, it might link you up to other men of that same surname, in which case you would want to correspond with those men and find out who their earliest ancestor is, who their earliest known ancestor is, who they're stuck on in the family. And maybe they're farther back on the tree than you are, and you can connect into their line. So that would be the general idea of the Y DNA. But with your autosomal DNA, a third great grandfather should, hopefully, you might have some matches to his family in your autosomal DNA results. But you're going to want to sort out your DNA matches by family line. And so if you've done the Ancestry test, Barbara, or the MyHeritage test, you can create groups. There's a grouping function in both of those testing companies on their match page. And you create a group, you name the group, whatever you want to name it, and you give it a color coding. There's 24 different color codes that you can use. And you do that, and then I would color code all of the different lines of your family. So, you know, starting with your great grandparents, I would give your great grandparents a color coding, and then each couple. So you have 4 sets of great grandparents. I'd give each couple a colored dot, and anybody that descends from that couple on your match list, I'd give that same colored dot. Then I'd go back to your second great grandparents and do the same thing for each second great grandparent couple. And then I'd go back to your third great grandparents and do the same thing again. And you should eventually find some matches that are to that third great grandfather's family on your autosomal DNA matches. Now, if that all was Greek to you and you don't know what I'm talking about, email us. And I can send you some blog postings, and there's also some YouTube videos that show you how to do that, how to assign the colored dots. So hopefully that will help you. Okay, Thomas asked, isn't autosomal DNA only accurate back to 5 or 6 generations? Well, we kind of just talked about this a little bit. You get just a little bit. Remember how we were just saying that your 4th great grandparent, you got about 1.5% of their DNA. Well, then that means that from your 5th great grandparent, you're going to get less than 1% from that person. And your 6th great grandparent, you're going to be down in like 0.3%. And so right around the 5th to 6th great grandparent level, you're inheriting so little autosomal DNA from that person that it's not really going to be that measurable. You're not going to have very many matches. They're going to be kind of iffy matches. They're going to be very low level matches. It's going to be hard to prove anything from those kind of matches. So basically around the 5th to 6th great grandparent level, you would expect to stop getting matches to those families on the autosomal test. So it's not that it isn't accurate, it's just that you will stop getting matches to your family at some point because it just doesn't reach back that far into your family tree. The matches are just so small that they're not measurable. Okay, let's see here. Okay, how much do you trust through lines on Ancestry? Okay, so this is from Sue. Through lines are very interesting. Through lines, if you haven't done Ancestry DNA, through lines is a really nice feature that they have. I like through lines a lot. It's always suggesting interesting things to me. But it's not always correct. So it suggests interesting hypotheses that then you have to look at and evaluate and say to yourself, is this true? And can I verify it with a genealogical record? So through lines is basically looking at the trees of your matches. And it's saying, I found, so through lines will show you your tree. And then it will show you these other people coming down from different, from the same ancestor or from a sibling of an ancestor. And it says, you know, this person is your DNA match, and we put them on your tree. So kind of through lines is where Ancestry is kind of putting people on your tree for you and showing you how you might be related to them. And these are the DNA matches that you have. And especially the more close matches that you have, oftentimes it's exactly correct. You know, your first cousin shows up on through lines as your first cousin because they have a tree that links to your grandparents, and your tree links to the grandparents. And so Ancestry has run their algorithm and matched those two up and said, you both have the same grandparents in your tree, therefore your first cousins. And they show us that on through lines. But back third, fourth, fifth, sixth cousins range, the people that show up on through lines, you know, you don't know them personally, and you don't know whether to trust that their tree is accurate. And that's where it runs into difficulties. We all think our tree is accurate, right? But if people start showing up on your through lines as these distant cousins and you've never heard of them, and when you look at their tree, it looks fantastical, or it looks like it doesn't make sense to you how they could actually be related to you, then I would treat that with some caution. Since through lines is based on trees, if the other person's tree is wrong, then Ancestry doesn't know that. All Ancestry is doing is looking at the trees and comparing them and saying, oh, these trees have the same ancestor in them, therefore they got to be related to each other. But if the other person's tree is wrong, then you can get a through line that's wrong. So definitely verify. The other thing to do is when through lines gives you a potential ancestor is somebody that Ancestry thinks may be the parent of your ancestor. And I always scrutinize those very, very carefully. And most of the time they're based on incorrect trees. So other people put up trees, they've said that these are the parents of our ancestor. And I look at it and I say, that's hogwash. I've already eliminated that couple. They can't be the parents of our ancestor. But it might be on a lot of trees out there. And so if you've got kind of one of those ancestors where a bunch of people have decided that their parents are, you know, like I have a family of Rushes in my family. So Rusch. And there's this rumor out there, very persistent, that we're related to Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And so every once in a while, I'll get a through lines or I'll get a hint that says Benjamin Rush is the parent of my Rush. And I'm like, no, he's not. But it's just one of those rumors that's out there with all these trees that are incorrect and other people have copied them. And they do creep into through lines sometimes because through lines is basing off of trees. But sometimes through lines can definitely put a DNA match on your tree that you didn't know how that you were related to them. And when you back it up and look at it and you say, yeah, that is true. This is exciting. This is new information. So definitely just, you know, be careful with them, but they can give you really good hints. Obviously you are related to these matches somehow. And if it's not the way that through lines is suggesting, then you are related to that person in some other way, because they're a DNA match with you. I don't know. I hope that answered your question. I was kind of long-winded there. Okay, here's a question about ethnicity. Yay. Okay, Pam says, why would siblings have differences when we compare the three of us? Because your parents, because each of you got different sections of your parents' DNA. If Pam's saying she's got 3 siblings She's not mentioned that they're identical twins. So if you're non-identical twins, then you each got different parts of the parent's DNA. And I think you share about 50% of your DNA with your siblings, and I may be wrong about that. It may be 33%. I'm sorry, I'm getting my percentages mixed up. It's somewhere around that amount. So that means that you don't share, some of the other DNA that you have, your parents passed on to you, but they didn't pass on to your siblings. And so your parent might have been 1% Finnish, and your sister got that Finnish DNA from one of your parents, but you didn't get that. You didn't get that 1%. So that's why your sister shows up as part Finnish and you don't. It's just the luck of the draw, basically, of how the DNA got distributed when the sperm and the egg, came together and formed you and your two siblings. So it's very normal to have that. As long as the testing came back and said you were full siblings, then you're full siblings. Sheila asked about Neanderthal DNA, and I do not know the answer to your question, Sheila. That might be something that you could just try to look. I know that 23andMe does a lot of work with Neanderthal DNA, so you might go to their website and kind of poke around over there. And I bet they have some information about that, but I am not up on the Neanderthal DNA, so sorry. Okay, so Luann, if I think I'm following her question, she says she had an NPE and it impacted all of my DNA matches. Traditional methods were not helpful. I'm not sure if she's talking about sorting, if you're talking about sorting your matches out, Luann, or what. Have you tried the Leeds method? Because the Leeds method will sort out your matches into 4 grandparent clusters. And then if you know some of your family, I mean, obviously you don't know, you may not know who the NPE is, you may not have figured that all out, but if you know some of the rest of the family, you'll be able to identify the clusters that are devoted to that side of the family, and then you can figure out which is the NPE side, if I understand you correctly. Feel free to send us an email if you wanted to explain more about what you're talking about. And for people that don't know, NPE means not parent expected. So she doesn't say necessarily it was her parent, but it may have been a grandparent or or someone close in her family that was not the parent on the birth certificate is usually what that means. So where, a lot of people find this out by testing their siblings, and they find out that they're half siblings with their siblings. And so the father that raised them or the father that was on their birth certificate has turned out not to be their biological father. They call that an NPE. So just for your reference. Okay. Carolyn, and this might be an ethnicity question also, I'm not quite sure. What happens when you're 100% in one area? How could you tell which grandparents you come from? Okay, Carolyn, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. If you're 100%, basically, if you're trying to figure out your grandparents, you're not going to be doing it by ethnicity. You're going to be doing it by your matches. So let's say you're 100%, Swedish, and that's what your actual ethnicity estimate comes out as. That's great. If that matches your family tree, that's wonderful. But to figure out who a grandparent was, you would have to be looking at the matches that you have and eliminating matches to your known family members, and then the matches that you don't know and must be from the unknown grandparent side. So I don't know if that's your question, but that's how I'm taking your question. But feel free to send us an email if it wasn't. Pat says, does Ancestry.com have a DNA painter option? No. DNA painter, if you're talking about being able to paint matches on your chromosome, which is what you can do at DNA painter, You cannot do that at Ancestry. And so you have to, if you wanted to know which chromosome you matched a certain person on that was an Ancestry match, you'd have to get that person to upload to a different company. A person who tested Ancestry can upload to Family Tree DNA or MyHeritage for free. And so if you can get your Ancestry match to do that, MyHeritage and Family Tree DNA do work with DNA Painter. But Ancestry doesn't really, unfortunately. And my understanding is from the different people that have talked to Ancestry about this, they don't intend to offer us a chromosome browser anytime soon. So a chromosome browser would be where we could see exactly on which chromosomes we match our DNA. And Ancestry doesn't allow us that information right now. Maybe they will in the future, but I'm kind of doubtful. Okay, Julia says, okay, so Julia's husband has taken a Family Tree DNA test at 37 markers. So this is the male line test that we were talking about earlier. And she said he has one match to his surname, but he has a lot of matches to other surnames. No. And then she says, are those female lines? No, the Y-DNA test is only looking at the male line. I'm wondering if your husband is Scottish or Irish, or if he's, what his background is. There are certain groups that tend to have a lot more matches to different surnames than others. And so it may be just that he's from one of those groups. If he's from a non-patrilineal society, or a society that didn't get surnames until much later in time, like the Ashkenazi Jewish people or the Scandinavians didn't take a set surname until like the 1800s. So it's really difficult. If your husband's name is McMurray, which is your last name, then he's probably Scottish, and this is probably a result of the clan system. A lot of Scottish people that I have seen do the Y-DNA test get a lot of matches to other basically kind of Scottish background men and Scottish or Irish background men. And I think it's that they might have all belonged to the same clan at one point, further back in time, obviously. And maybe didn't have a set surname, as much of a set surname as you thought. But I would definitely have him work with his match that is of his same surname first, and try to get somewhere with that person, because he's probably most closely related to him. If your husband upgraded to a higher level, like 111 markers, probably some of those other surname people would drop off. They might not be closely related to him at the 111 marker level, but it's because their paternal line is just probably distantly related to your husband's in Scotland, back in Scotland, is what my answer would probably be, if that is your husband's last name. Sue asks, I've heard that if your parents are no longer alive, it is beneficial to get all your siblings to do a DNA test. What is the advantage? Well, so basically, your parents are no longer alive, you can't get their DNA. Now, if your aunts and uncles are alive, if you have, a sibling of one of your parents alive, it's very beneficial to test that person, actually, and they can kind of stand in for your parents' DNA in some regards, and that would be more helpful than getting your siblings. But getting your siblings would be a good stand-in for your parents as well, because remember, you got 50% of your DNA from mom and 50% from dad, and your siblings got a different 50% than you did. So testing you and all your siblings would more approximate your parents' DNA. Your siblings would have different matches than you do. And there might be some clues in some of those matches that could get you farther back in time. But it really just depends on your goals for the DNA testing. it might just be fun for all of your siblings to test just for kicks, you know, to see the ethnicity estimate, to go back and forth and kind of talk about that with each other. But yeah, definitely if you have an aunt or uncle alive, I would start with testing them. Okay, Steve says, Jed Match says my parents are not related. But I have a second cousin who is related to me on both maternal and paternal side. Your thoughts? Okay, so this is probably Ancestry, where it's trying to divide up your matches again to side 1 and to side 2. So I don't know if you know who the second cousin actually is, or if this person is an unknown person to you. It could just be an Ancestry error where Ancestry is saying both sides, but it's not really both sides. You'd want to check your shared matches and see, is this person also sharing with people on my father's side and on my mother's side? If that's the case, then, you know, check their tree, the second cousin, and see whether, you know, they could be just, you know, kind of coincidentally related to both sides of your family. The only other thing I could think of is that, I don't think that would work though, no. If one of your siblings had a child who had a grandchild, who had a great-grandchild or something, and this person was that person, but I don't know how old you are, whether it's possible for you to have like a great niece or a great nephew, they would be descended from both of your parents, and that would make that then correct. But so look at the shared matches and then look at that person's tree if you can. All right, we're gonna have to wind things down. Let me try to just go through some of these other matches here, or these other questions, and see if I can do anything. Okay, Julie has a follow-up. Does the family tree DNA 37 marker, that's the Y chromosome test back then the 5 or 6 generations of an autosomal test? And that is a good question, because yes, and that is one of the reasons you want to do a Y chromosome test for your male relatives, because the Y chromosome test actually will go back about 15 to 20 generations, perhaps. And so it reaches back a lot further in time. And so it's a really good test for looking at that male line like we're talking about here. Elena, okay, I'm going to make Elena's question maybe our last one, or their second to the last one. I'll see if I can find another one. Elena asked, how can the U.S. communities be leveraged for African American research? So I think she's talking about the communities at Ancestry. And I think some of my heritage might have some communities also. Along with those communities that go back to the old country, like the one I showed you for my aunt that said that she was from Slovenia, you also get communities here in the US. And so those are areas where your relatives basically lived at one point or another. So if you get a community that says, I don't know exactly how they're worded, but let's say your community says African American families in Virginia. Then, but you have only families that were in the South. And so you say to yourself, well, how can that be? Well, this is telling you, this community is telling you that some of your Southern African American ancestors originally were in Virginia. So yes, those communities in the US can be very useful, especially if you're stuck out in Alabama and you're not able to get yourself back any further out of Alabama, but you have a community that says that your family was in Virginia. You should definitely pay attention to that, because that is showing you that at least one of your lines, and maybe several of them, were previously in Virginia. So yes, pay attention to those communities. Like I said, many people say that the communities, especially the ones at Ancestry, are very, very accurate. All right, let me see if I have one more that I could answer kind of quickly. I have a first cousin show on Ancestry, but we can't find out how we are related. She isn't related to other family members that I know, just me. Okay, Sharon, well, that's very interesting. I would ask you a series of questions, and you may want to email us, but here's the series of questions. When you have a first cousin, this is a very close match, right? And theoretically, when you have somebody really close like that show up and you don't expect them, it's concerning maybe in some ways to you. Was this person adopted? I mean, have you had a communication with them? Do you know their story? Certainly a family adoption could have been hidden from you. You know, if an aunt or an uncle of yours, that would be the most likely scenario. If they're showing as a first cousin, that maybe an aunt or uncle of yours gave a child up for adoption and it was not known in the family. That certainly could be the answer. It is not the only answer, certainly. But I would look at your matches. You're saying that she doesn't match to other family members that you know. I find that intriguing as well. Do you have, when you look at your match list, Sharon, do you have matches to your mother's side, to cousins or, you know, relatives on your mother's side that you know of, and matches to your father's side? So that's a question for you when you're looking at your match list. Are you seeing members of both families, your father and your mother's side? Because a first cousin match really ought to be matching with either one side or the other. So I would question, you know, what's going on there. And maybe, Sharon, you have a mystery on your family tree, like maybe you don't know one of your grandparents or something like that. And this could be coming in from that mystery side of the family. So there's a lot of unknown questions there, but definitely start there. Do you have matches to both your mother and your father's side? Have you communicated with this first cousin and seen what their story is? Who are the shared matches with this first cousin if they're not to your known family members? That would be another question. So certainly send us an email if you want to explore that a little more, and I could talk it over with you a little more. Okay, now we have a lot of questions in here, and I'm really sorry, but we're just not going to be able to get to them. I think we're going to have to close this down. So I appreciate y'all, and like I said, send us an email.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sarah. It's amazing how you can handle all of these questions. And if you're taking a quick glance through chat, you can see that people are very grateful for the information you shared. So thank you very much. As you articulated, I invite everyone whose question didn't get answered, or maybe the answer spurred another question, please send an email, as has been indicated in chat, genealogy@acpl.info. Send us your questions. If you want a copy of the chat, use that same email to send to us as well. I hope you enjoyed this program as much as I did. And thanks again, Sarah, for a really great presentation. And until next week, we wish you a very good evening. Join us this Sunday for a really great program by Ron Ahrens sponsored by the Northeast Indiana Jewish Genealogical Society. You can find that on our homepage as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a good evening.